Welcome to our webinar, all about securing qualifying work experience. So thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you watching us on recording, you're very welcome. My name's Alice. I'm from the College of Legal Practice. I've been with the college quite a few years, working with the team to grow the organisation, and we're at a really exciting point in our development now, with quite a few hundred students studying with us to take the SQE, which is really exciting. So just a little bit of housekeeping and information for you first before we start. If anyone would like to use closed captions and that's the way they want to watch and listen to the panel, feel free to add them by clicking on you can click on the More button and the captions on the right at the bottom of your screen. We also will be able to provide a recording for you afterwards. In terms of the chat bars, please, as I said, introduce yourself in the chat bar and add any questions as you go. We've got a whole host of questions that you all submitted when you registered. So thank you for those, because they've really guided us to shape the panel, because we want it to be as relevant for you as possible. So if you just keep adding in any questions and thoughts, we'll try and make sure that we answer the burning questions that you have in your minds, because we've got lots and lots of questions to get through. So please use the webinar chat. I think is probably the best one to use. We do have a Q&A as well, but the webinar chat's probably the easiest one for us all to glance at as we go. The webinar should take up to an hour and a half, but I think probably we'll see where we get to along the way, and probably depend on quite how many questions we have from everyone. First things to do is to introduce the panel, or to let them introduce themselves, I should say, which is much more interesting than me doing it for you. So where will I start? Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone, good evening, thanks for coming along. My name's Sarah Taylor and I'm one of the programme leaders at the college, and I have my main responsibility is looking after the LLM and also the SQE2 course. Just by way of background, I'm a qualified solicitor. I spent a long time in both private practice and in-house as a corporate commercial solicitor before moving into legal education. I spent a good deal of time at a university on as legal practice course programme leader before moving to the College of Legal Practice, where I've been with the organisation for a couple of years now.
Thank you, Sarah. Idin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Idin. I am a former corporate lawyer, qualified a year and a half ago at a commercial law firm, but on the side as well, or I guess now primarily I create content for aspiring lawyers online, and started a media company called Little Law, which is aiming at creating commercial awareness updates and news summaries to help bridge the commercial awareness gap between for aspiring lawyers, to help them get into legal careers.
Thank you. And Ruth?
Hi, my name is Ruth Ekong. I'm a director and solicitor at Fitch Solutions. I manage a lot of commercial deals and negotiations there for the sales global team. I'm also a graduate of the College of Legal Practice. I did my SQE2 pre-qualification course through them, and then subsequently qualified with the SRA in April this year.
Thank you. Oh, thank you all for joining us. So, and we're going to kick off with an introduction to what is qualified work experience. So we did have a lot of questions where we were being asked all sorts of things about QWE. So we're going to start right from the very beginning. So Sarah, would you mind just talking us through what is qualifying work experience?
Not at all. So essentially, QWE, as it's more commonly known, is a period of practical training experience, work experience, that you need to undertake in order to qualify as a solicitor using the SQE pathway. Essentially, it is much more simple than the old training contract, which it replaces. So broadly speaking, you can undertake qualifying work experience anywhere in the world, but the main thing is that you've got to get it signed off or confirmed by a solicitor or compliance officer who is regulated by the SRA in England and Wales. The other main thing to note, which is similar to a training contract, that it has to amount to 2 years worth of training experience, but the other restrictions and requirements that used to apply to training contracts don't apply to QWE. For example, you'll no longer have to do that seat rotation of 4 seats as part of your, that you used to have to do as part of your training contract. You can undertake 1 or more opportunities for work experience. So you could decide to, you know exactly where you want to qualify. So you go straight into that period and you could spend the whole 2 years in one area of practice. Or if you want to keep your options open, you can obviously do a number of rotations in the same way that you would do in a training contract. The other main thing is that you don't have to do your training all in one institution, which is traditionally what you'd have done if you'd undertaken a training contract. You've got the ability to do your work experience in up to 4 different organisations. So it's up to you, basically, how you pick and choose how you want to use your qualifying work experience. What I would say, though, is that obviously particularly for the bigger firms, the qualifying work experience does look very much still like a training contract at the moment, apart from its name. It's no longer viewed as a training contract. But apart from that, for the bigger firms, at least at the moment, QWE does take on the appearance of what you'd probably know as a training contract, with those 4 traditional seats rotating round on a 6-month basis to make up your 2 years qualifying work experience. So that's the basics. Do you want me to?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we've got a few questions about what can be counted. So quick fire, Sarah. So
Okay.
Can pupillage or marshalling count towards QWE?
Okay, so just before I move into that, what I would say is that in terms of what's important is that you undertake some of the competencies that the SRA stipulate. So there are a number of solicitor competencies that are required for a day 1 solicitor, and the SRA, as part of your qualifying work experience, expects you to cover at least 2 or more of those competencies. And the other thing to note is that it must be in some sort of legal arena, although it doesn't need to be in a law firm. So pupillage. A pupillage is probably going to tick those boxes, because what you're looking at in terms of the competencies is undertaking technical legal work such as drafting, research, sort of interviewing, managing clients, that kind of thing. So a pupillage is going to tick those sort of solicitor competencies that the SRA is looking for. Marshalling, and I'm not sure if everyone knows what marshalling is, but my understanding is that marshalling is where essentially you go along, you accompany a judge to a court appearance or a court hearing. So that is more akin to, I would say, shadowing, and it might not be that shadowing would be sufficient to meet those competencies. But what you can do is that the SRA have got a link to those all-important student competencies. So what you can do is use that as a bit of checklist to see if what you're doing by QWE is going to tick those competencies that you need to get signed off.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, we've got a couple of different questions about what could count. I think the first one was previous experience, or can they do their SQE first and do their QWE a few years after that? So is there a time frame around qualifying work experience?
No, the QWE element is much more flexible now. So there is no time limit within which you've got to do your QWE. Just so that you know, what's important is the exam that you now have to take alongside QWE, the exam which is in 2 parts, which is called SQE1 and SQE2, that has got to be done. The 2 elements have to be done within a 6-year period. But that's the only time stipulation on your pathway to becoming a solicitor. So QWE, it might be that you're already working in a law firm, or perhaps, for example, if you're at university, you are in a law clinic, or you do a work placement, And even though you haven't yet started your other formal legal training, such as the SQE, for example, you can still use that work experience or vocation scheme experience that you've accumulated at university towards QWE. It could be many years before, but what's important is that it's got to be signed off by a solicitor or a compliance officer. So that's where you've got to be talking to the organisation to make sure that somebody will be willing to do that for you if you want it to count towards your QWE.
Thank you, Sarah. And can it be experience outside England? We had that question.
Yeah, that's so. As I said in my introduction, it can be anywhere in the world. So if you're, for example, a foreign based lawyer, perhaps you've got experience abroad and you're coming into England, and absolutely that because it's all about those competencies, those skills that you need to work in a legal practice, and obviously those are going to be the same almost anywhere in the world where you might practice. So as long as you can get it signed off by someone in the UK, and that's probably going to be someone who obviously knows the type of work you're doing, because what's important when it gets signed off is that the record that you've kept is accurate. They're not signing off the quality of your work, they're just signing off the fact that you've done the work that you have put down on that record. So yes, so it can be done anywhere in the world, in principle.
Thank you. And we've got a question submitted, and a similar one in the chat bar actually, which is it permitted for work experience to be gained in multiple areas of law? And in the chat it says, can you spend a year at one firm and then another year at another firm?
Absolutely. This is where the SRA have brought in their flexibility. So the second question, yeah, absolutely. You could do 1 year at one firm and another year at another firm, and just make sure that when you move on that you do get your record signed off, because that's going to be important, because that's what the SRA are looking for when they are looking at admitting you as a solicitor. And just remind me of the other question that was before that.
So can you spend 1 year at one firm and another firm? And then the other one was about how many different areas of law can you include?
Yeah, as many as you want. So you could, for example, do 6 areas of law in one place and then 1 area of law in another place. So it's a mix. It's very much a sort of mix and match, as long as you are not asking more than 4 organisations to sign off your work, because that's the limit that the SRA have placed on the number of institutions which you can get your work signed off on.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, I wonder whether you want to share with us how you went through your qualifying work experience. How did that work for you?
Thank you. Yeah, so I've accumulated my experience over a number of years. So I would say I started my qualifying journey about 10 years ago, which is kind of indicating my age a little bit, but started my qualifying journey then and worked for a number of law firms. So for me, and to Sarah's point, I then, when I was putting together my application for qualifying work experience, I used my experience from my current company, because obviously I already had more than 2 years, but I could have used previous experiences. It was just easy to use the one. So that was fairly straightforward, because I'd been working, I had previous experience as a paralegal, for example. I'd, done some shadowing and, led my own deals. So to Sarah's point, I think it can be accumulated if you're working on cases, or you're working with a team and you're doing qualifying legal work. You can use it as examples of what you're doing. So that was pretty much how I did it. And I had a number of, I would say, acquaintances in the legal field who are familiar with my work. So I had to share that with them. Obviously, there's a whole process you have to go through to check certain, what you've done, and they will ask you certain questions, and you need to show them identifying information. So it is a process. But I would say to Sarah's point, if you're currently working at a firm, if you're currently doing a placement, for example, you cannot use those if you're working directly with a solicitor or somebody who is able to review your work. You can use that towards your QWE.
Yeah, thank you. Idin, what are you seeing at the moment around the introduction of the SQE and introducing qualifying work experience into the mix for training contracts? Because I know Sarah said that they're not training contracts anymore, but to some extent they are. I mean, what's your view? What are you seeing?
I think it's a great development, and I think the flexibility of it is huge in terms of improving accessibility for legal careers. I think it's really good, and in comparison with a training contract, I guess you benefit from not having to have that rigid structure, which the training contracts typically have. Most training contracts have, the 6 month, 4 seats, and that seems to be the same. But hopefully, firms will be a bit more, I guess, creative with how they train their lawyers. I don't think it's necessary that you need to have experience in. Let me rephrase that. I think experience in different areas of law is valuable, regardless of where you end up. So I think the removal of the rigidity of the qualifying work experience is actually really beneficial, and can pave the way for lawyers to have kind of more multifaceted experiences.
Yeah, thank you. And we've certainly seen at the college, some of the firms that we're working with have taken quite different approaches to their training contracts, using the flexibility of qualifying work experience and the flexibility of the SQE, haven't we, Sarah?
Yes, we have. And we've got, people perhaps sort of doing some work experience in between SQE1 and SQE2, or we've got people sort of moving straight from SQE1, the 2 prep courses, before moving on to their training contract, or doing their training contract before they do SQE. So it lends itself a lot more, as Idin said, to a much more flexible approach, which is great. Yeah.
Great. So hopefully that answers most people's questions on what is qualifying work experience. Now we're going to move on a little bit to the questions that there are quite a lot of questions, obviously, around how to secure work experience, work placements, vacation schemes, training contracts. So we're going to take some of those kind of one by one. If we're thinking perhaps at a current undergraduate level, we'll start there. So who would like to answer this one? What is the best approach when starting to look for legal work experience? I mean, Ruth, I don't know what your experience was right back at the beginning when you were starting to look for work experience.
It was very challenging, I won't lie. I think it's good that people are being a bit more honest about that process, because it is very grueling, and it's not to make it seem impossible, but it is something that I think you have to be very dedicated to and quite resilient about. I think that there are a lot of people who want to be in this space. And my advice has always been to find your unique selling points and lean to firms that accommodate that. So I for example, I studied law and German at university. I wanted to be a lawyer linguist, but what I found is that helped me to find roles where second language was needed. So if it was a paralegal opportunity, I worked with Freshfields for a couple of years. They had a lot of international law type cases. So I could always try and say, okay, well, I've studied this language, or I have a knowledge of this, I would be useful for this. So that really gave me an edge. So I would say it can be challenging and it can be disheartening, but I would say, continue just to come to events like these, for example. I believe networking was very helpful for me, because I was able to kind of build on that and use, just having gone to a number of different events and just asked questions about the firm and what they were doing, been able to kind of apply. So I'd say, it's really important. And if I don't mind me adding, I would say to some degree, it's really important not to blind apply to sometimes, because I think you can send out a host of applications with no real context as to what the intention is. And I think that can make it really a lot more disconcerting, because people aren't reviewing you or looking at you based on what you've put forward. They're just putting, you're a number. So I think it's good to be able to, in my view, I would say, try and find unique selling points. So things about yourself that may stand out beyond other candidates, or just really gathering intel about an industry you really like. And I would say applying for those. So, because once I got the first 1 or 2 opportunities, it was much easier. So once I started on that, so I'd say it's really just the first one or two that would be the game changer. At least for me, it was. So I'd say keep trying and finding stuff that's probably unique to you as well.
Okay. So if we take it right to the beginning, I guess there's a question about shadowing. So starting off right at the beginning of their journey as an undergrad. And Idin, I don't know what you'd be suggesting if we're talking about shadowing or your initial vacation schemes. I guess that can be very competitive, but that initial opportunity to get into that workplace as a work placement, what would your advice be?
So I didn't do qualifying work experience, but I did work experience to help, improve my understanding of the legal career, and then, help strengthen my application when I was doing training contract or vac scheme applications. And I'd echo what Ruth said, that it is super challenging to get it. I think that's important to emphasize, and it took me a long time. And again, what, as Ruth said, I think the first one was really difficult, and from then you can go into these roles with a bit of momentum, because you have these experiences that you have, you can speak about them, and you can talk about different like legal or legal adjacent roles that you did. My first couple of law jobs one was a voluntary role at a law clinic in Brent, which was invaluable for me because of the nature of the organization. It's very it's a law clinic. It's people who are coming in without money to get lawyers, and there's like funding issues there. So essentially, you don't always have a lot of people there who can do the work, or a lot of qualified people. So you coming in as a volunteer, even just with your law degree, you have a lot of value you can add, and you can get quite involved with a lot of things. So that was my first legal role. And looking back on it, I was afforded a lot of responsibility as someone who just had a law degree and was willing to help. Even more so than I did as a trainee lawyer. So it was a great experience, and it gave me a lot I could speak about at other roles, which were paid jobs. And my first paid legal job was a kind of like a temping role. It was a temporary paralegal role doing document review, which is like kind of boring, but at the time when it's your first legal role, it's there's so much you can learn from that. And I think those two paved the way for me to get further legal roles, and be able to they act like a stepping stone, I think, for me to improve or expand my legal work experience.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think so there's a question in the Q&A we've been sent, which is about getting your foot in the door without having any practical experience. So it's that very first opportunity, isn't it? So Sarah, what would you be recommending to some of those undergraduates really trying to just get into that workplace and try and experience it for the first time?
So first of all, I would say just make the most of any networking opportunities that arise at uni, because most universities now are aware of how challenging it is for people to get into the legal profession. And so, they put on networking events where you can go and meet sort of solicitors in firms, or you have law fairs, and just get chatting to them, because quite often that can lead to an introduction. They can say, you can ask them if you can come along and just do some shadowing work, even if it's not proper work experience, and then you never know where that might lead. The other thing is I'd get involved in your uni pro bono work. That's another great way to start putting things onto your CV to make yourself stand out. Lots of universities have really good connections with local court schemes or Citizens Advice Bureau. Anything like that is going to be valuable. And as Idin and Ruth have said, it's stepping stones that enable you just to build up your CV. And sometimes those relationships you make in those type of areas enable you to then make further connections, which lead you down a different path. So yeah, make the most of all those opportunities that the universities provide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I just wanted to add to what Sarah was going to say. Sorry, I completely forgot and had wiped out all of the different stuff I'd done at uni. And to be honest, that probably was what got me the experience I got. And you forget because I had actually worked at the Citizens Advice Bureau for 2 weeks, and I did that, and that was really useful. I'd done the moot courts. I'd done pro bono, where we went to visit, like, help give advice to, like, low grade prisoners and things like that. And they're things like that sound small, but they're really very valuable, and they'll give you examples that you can put on your CV, whereas people who won't have anything. But those are really free, practical, available opportunities. I mean, as once a litigation friend, that's also a really random example, but as much as that's like, you can support people, and just saying, I was just there to help, with any kind of little guidance. Even just that experience of having been to court, and is quite key. So it is challenging, but there are definitely ways, and I think universities are doing better jobs now of trying to create those opportunities to just be exposed, to have conversations, and maybe through that have a couple of weeks experience that could really make the difference. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And what I'd add to that, Ruth, is that employers are looking for you to be proactive as well. So really sort of making the most of your own situation. So if you can show that you have been really proactive in your approach to getting as much legal experience, it also shows that you're enthusiastic and you're keen as well. Yeah, as Ruth said, make the most of it.
And it sounds go on. Yeah,
sorry, there's a lot of add-ons to this, but yeah, what Ruth said, I think we're talking a lot about voluntary roles, and I understand that sometimes that could be a challenge for people financially. But my placement with Brent Law Centre, which was a voluntary role, was, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, so it wasn't like a long-term thing. So I would say, even if that opportunities arise to do voluntary roles, don't underestimate like short-term things like that, because in those 2 or 3 weeks I got loads of experience, as I said, and lots of things to talk about. So yeah, that's something I just wanted to add.
Yeah, and remember that some of that voluntary work, this is not something we've touched on, but voluntary work as well as paid work can count towards your QWE as well. I mean, you do have to be a bit careful about what you want to count, but get as much experience as possible, and then hopefully you'll be able to cherry pick which bits you want to put on as your QWE. But yeah, again, that's another sort of flexibility that the SRA have introduced, is that voluntary and unpaid work can count towards QWE as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've also all had experience in lots of different areas, and that isn't the same as the areas of law that you've ended up necessarily practicing in either. So I do wonder whether it's difficult, isn't it? Because training contracts are all about trying to align yourself with a particular type of firm and really focus in on that. And we'll talk about commercial awareness in a moment and really understand that firm. Whereas actually, to initially start all of this off, it is knocking on your high street firm's door, or it is very much seeing what opportunities are available to you as a volunteer. So there's kind of a couple of different things to consider here, isn't there, by the sounds of things? And it's kind of working out how to get that initial step, but maybe not being too specific about that. Would that be fair to say? I don't know, Ruth?
Yeah, I think so. I've seen a lot of comments in the chat about the cost. I would say you have to be really creative. I think for an industry that is very saturated, you have to be creative, and you have to think outside the box. And as you said, the standard stuff probably won't work for everybody. You have to be able to say, okay, is there Citizens Advice Bureau down the road from my house? Are there voluntary opportunities I can do virtually? Like there are some things that you can do. I mean, we're in a different space now where there are virtual opportunities as well. So it's like, if cost is a big thing for you, look out for those opportunities where you can at least engage or network virtually and build those connections. because it is going to be whoever really is the most proactive, right? And I think that is something that, at the time when I was younger, you're not earning, so the situation hasn't really changed. The stakes haven't changed in that sense. And I think with less, I would say, online presence in that sense, in terms of being able to find some of these same opportunities. So I would say there is a lot of content out there now about networking and about being able to engage people at firms. Firms are doing a lot more virtual events as well. So it's like, there are creative ways to get your foot in the door without spending anything. So I'd say, building your network virtually may be the first step if costs are a big thing for you. And then working through that network and seeing if you can then get leads to opportunities, maybe, a step if you're finding it hard financially at this time.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. So moving on to the slightly more kind of formal approaches, obviously firms do have ranges of vacation schemes increasingly frequently, which is good to see. They also have insight days. Some vacation schemes obviously lead and internships as well, can actually be the only route into certain training contracts. So Idin, where do we start this whole more formal competitive process, I guess, that a lot of students are experiencing in terms of, perhaps should we take, I guess, the vacation schemes, the internships to start with, and then move on to the training contracts?
So you're asking what was my experience of the vacation scheme?
If you did one as well, yes, but also kind of advice for applying for them, I think, as well.
I did a couple. I got rejected for more than I received. So I went through the process many, many times. I think that's an inevitable, well, some people manage to get them like first time. But for me, and I'd imagine most people, I think that's probably one thing that I might as well just say up front. The application process for the vacation schemes are super competitive. Yeah, I think I got like tens of rejections, maybe like I applied for 3 across two or 3 years, I think. So it stacked up. But I think that's one thing to keep in mind. It's not like a lot of the times just the sheer numbers it means that it's going to be a competitive process, and the first few rejections are the most painful, and you take them very personally, but that's not something you should do. And over time, you get a bit more comfortable with it. And yeah, in terms of the application process, I think there's loads of different stages. Generally, there's a written application. There's usually videos or online assessments and assessment days. I guess I could give specific information if anyone has specific questions about each one. But generally, I think to remember that you're applying for, I guess the most important part is the written application, and to remember that you're applying for a role in a business that understanding how that business operates is the key to success in the application process. And also, I think my writing style, I think is a common issue, because I review a lot of written applications, and I think the writing style is important in terms of a practical tip. The way you'd write your university degree essays should be different to the way you write application forms for law firms. Yeah, I think general points, that's what I'd say. Just be willing to accept that it's a competitive process. Rejection is almost inevitable, or like very likely. You only need one firm to give you the nod, and that's your career. You very much jumped over that hurdle. And secondly, understand the business you're applying to, so understand how law firms operate. It will help you give a framework and a direction to your answers. And finally, as a general piece of advice, is your writing style should be different to your university writing style, more succinct, more like business writing, and try and make it as clear as possible for the person who's reading it, who's probably reading 1,000 applications. So I think that's my advice.
And I was going to add one more thing to the advice that Idin just mentioned, is when you're doing your applications and people are asking for what skills have you acquired, what qualities have you got that you can bring, as well as just saying you've got the particular skill, you need to back it up with evidence. And that doesn't have to be legal evidence if you haven't got that on your CV. But as somebody says here, can you put your everyday work job on your application? What you'll be doing there is picking out those skills that you think would be transferable into a legal environment, because there are lots of transferable skills from other professions or other jobs that are really necessary for working in a legal environment. But I think that's another key thing for your applications, is your statement backed up by evidence, and then thinking about those transferable skills.
Yeah. One of the questions we had actually, Sarah, was what work experience and extracurricular activities would be useful. I suppose what they're thinking about is whether they should be doing things as an undergrad that help them with their application, whereas you're kind of saying it also slightly the other way around. But I think, customer service experience comes up often as something that is very transferable as either paid work or.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think any job in retail where you've got to work under pressure, deal with difficult sort of customers, work to deadlines, all of those are going to be qualities that are going to make you attractive to a legal firm. So although you might not have got the legal work experience, showing that you've got work experience, or you're working as part of a team, if you're on a hockey team, if you're on a football team, whatever, that again, all of those qualities are all, think of all those, I know it's like, it's sort of a bit cliche today, but those soft skills that you need, that you know that everyone talks about, those are all the things that employers are looking for as well. And you can get those in a variety of, whether it's sort of extracurricular activities that you do because you enjoy it, or if you need to do it because you need a part-time job. It's not going to be wasted because you can create evidence that then you can transfer into an application form.
Yeah. Ruth, have you got anything to add from that side of things?
Yeah, I would say, I did a lot of different things. So I wasn't sure what, at the beginning, I think what Idin was saying, you don't necessarily know what they're looking for particularly. So you're probably doing a lot of different things. My advice would be find a few things to do well. I would say try not to overwhelm yourself, because, it can be frustrating to think, okay, let me just do everything. I think, if you're doing any pro bono work or volunteering work, have that as one of your main things. If you've got a main job, pick two main things where you can focus, because otherwise you may find yourself getting overwhelmed and also focusing on too many things and trying to spread. Because I remember, you'd get like a question and you'd try to use like three or four different experiences, but I think can sometimes confuse your application. I think sometimes if you've got one experience where you were leading a team, where you had a lot of interpersonal skills, and you can use 3 examples from that specific role, that's a lot clearer than having lots of, disparate. So I think I wouldn't freak out about it. I would say try and be doing something actively, whether that's voluntary, whether that's, social, that you can use examples of, and I say that because people are reading, as you said, multiple applications. And if it sounds all over the shop, you will come across that way, even if you're just very proactive. So I think, my advice would be, as I got older, I realized that, okay, I could use this one experience. I've got a wealth of experience, and just focus on that and do that really well. And I think that would really help my experience when I was in interviews eventually, and I would get asked about things. I could speak to a number of different things in one role. So that would be my advice. If you've got a good gig that works well for you, stick to that and build skills in that, rather than, if I would say be all over maybe the place if you can't find that. So
yeah, thank you. And there's a question in the chat about using a job as a nursery nurse as transferable skills. So it's about pulling out, if I've understood it right, pulling out from your job what those skills are, what those experiences are, but making it relevant to the skills of the solicitor role that the trainee solicitor role you're applying for, or the firm you're applying for. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, for example, you're saying, do I talk about the safety of the children? You'd say you know that you need to work in a regulatory environment and understand regulation, so which is obviously key when you're a solicitor. So it's bringing out that kind of example that you can then think, well, how would that work in a legal environment, and frame your answer and the skill that you've acquired in your role to answering, how it would work in the legal environment. I think that's the key to looking at how you set down your transferable skills. But yeah, I mean, a nursery nurse is going to have all sorts of transferable skills, you know, sort of being able to communicate with a range of people, children, the parents, other nursery nurses, working in a team. You know, you've got all sorts of things that you're going to acquire in that role that could be transferred into a legal environment.
I just add, because I think there's something that I think I'm realizing now. I think prior to uni, I hadn't had that much exposure to lawyers or to, you know, it's very, I think we forget sometimes it's very theoretical up until that point. And so your knowledge of what is required as a lawyer is very textbook and maybe not as practical as, you know, what you really need to do, which is being able to have good people skills. So I think one of the things I would say alongside everything else people are doing is try and get proximity to people who are in the legal field. You know, ask them about what they do in their day-to-day, because I think sometimes I've been told a lot of applications can seem very theory-based, mainly because you don't have the practical experience. You don't know what they're looking for. So even if you're doing a day job, even if you've got other things that would be good, you don't know that that's a transferable skill because you don't have proximity to actual lawyers. So I think for me, one of the biggest things that shifted that was when I started kind of having, you know, maybe a mentor or somebody that I would speak to and understood more about what they did on a day-to-day basis. Because before you do the SQE2, before you get into the foot in the door, you don't really know what the day-to-day looks like of being a lawyer, being in a law firm. So I think that's for me, I realize more now how key that is and how much, if you're a student, unless you've had experience, you won't know that. So, you know, I would say try to network as well, so you can have that understanding of what would make sense to pull out of your CV, what would make sense to pull out of your working experience.
Yeah, thank you. So Idin, commercial awareness, what is it? And can you give us a couple of examples of what you mean by it, please?
I'm still trying to figure out what it is after 5 years. So I think commercial awareness is like, I became quite kind of like obsessed with commercial awareness as an idea or like as a concept, because I remember when I was at university, we had law firms come and say that commercial awareness was the area where a lot of applicants fell short, applicants that were otherwise strong in academics and extracurriculars and work experience and that sort of thing. So I'd always push them on it and be like, what is it? How do I get it? And I never felt that I had a satisfying answer or a satisfactory answer. So yeah, for years I'm trying to come up with one, and I think I have. So commercial awareness, I think, from what my understanding of what law firms are looking for is for you to understand that as a commercial lawyer, you're not going to be delving into black letter law and then reciting that. By black letter law, I mean like statutes or cases or something, like where the law is set out, and then reciting that to your client. That's not your job. And your client doesn't want to read the law. If you start talking about, often if you start, like, again, when I say it's different to your university essays, often in practice, if you start citing cases and statutes, no one can be bothered to read it. So once you kind of internalize that, you realize that your client is just looking for an answer to their business problem, which as a commercial lawyer, you'll be facing business problems. If you're doing kind of like private client work, you might be facing kind of individual problems. But as a commercial lawyer facing business problems, they want like a business answer. So it won't necessarily be a legal answer. You won't be talking about statutes or case laws. You'll be talking about what they can do to solve their situation. And in terms of like what is commercial awareness, it's, I guess, understanding first of all that it's going to be your legal answers are going to be contextual to your client and to clients. If I'm doing financial, I don't know, if I'm advising in financial regulation and a big multinational, actually, I guess financial regulation is a bit complicated, but like if I was advising on employment law and like a massive multinational firm which has loads of resources, comes to me and asks me a question, and then like a small startup comes up to me and asks me the same question. The context of those two companies, you might have a different answer to the same question. So I think commercial awareness is understanding that, and then to the extent you can, without being in a law firm, which I know is a challenge, try and understand what characteristics or different businesses have and how they would think and why they make the decisions they make, and understand kind of how law firms get involved in that. It is a challenging kind of journey, and I've tried to like come up with a mnemonic which I use at Little Law to help kind of give a framework to building commercial awareness, and I call it the 3 L's. So each one is an L. The first one is looking out. The second one is looking in, and the third one is law firm involvement. And I would say, whenever I pushed the law firm representatives at my firm for an answer of what is commercial awareness, they would always say read the headlines and read news articles. And again, like I thought that was okay, but I never really thought that was it. It didn't feel like that's what it is. That's what I should be doing, and that's sufficient. And right now, I think that's the first step you should be taking, and then you should be following these 3 L's. So let's say you read a news article about company A merging with company B. I wrote about one recently for Little Law. It was one company called the Restaurant Group buying a bunch of restaurants, like 40 restaurants from another big restaurant group, and they bought Frankie and Benny's and they bought Chiquitos, these 2 restaurants. The first step is looking out. So like, what are the wider factors that are resulting in this acquisition to take place? One was kind of rising interest rates right now, and cost of living means fewer people are eating out, which meant that these restaurants were not very profitable. So the previous owner wanted to shift them. The second L, the first one was looking out. The second L was looking in. So by that I mean step into the shoes of the different companies and think about why they're making the decisions. Why is the selling company making that decision, the sell choice? Why is the buying company making the buy choice? Again, I don't want to delve into don't want to waste too much time, but like the selling company in that case was a company that owned a big number of restaurants. They owned Frankie and Benny, they owned Chiquitos, they also owned Wagamama's. And I read a few articles as to why they're selling. And it turns out that Wagamama's is doing really well at the moment, whereas the other 2 are doing really bad. So they were investing in creating more locations for Wagamama's. So they wanted to get rid of this like dead weight that wasn't doing well and invest in the one, like double down on the one that was doing well. So that's a looking in section. And the third bit is law firm involvement. So the first one was looking out, which is like the wider factors. The second one is looking in, which is why they're making the decisions. Imagine you're in those boardrooms or whatever in the companies. And the third one is law firm involvement, which is relevant if you're doing applications or if you want to talk about a news story in your interview. Why would a law firm care about this? And I guess in that case, it'll be interesting to know, like that is an acquisition. That's what you call like a corporate deal. It'll be interesting to know what law firms get involved in a corporate transaction, which teams would be involved, what they would do. Again, I won't bore you with the details because I think I've gone on long enough. But yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's what commercial awareness is. That's the importance of it, and that's the kind of framework I'd use to help build it myself.
That's really interesting. I think sometimes if we did go into the detail, it becomes more valuable. So thank you, Idin. Ryan's asked, what can I do to better understand commercial awareness? So I guess it's that example though, isn't it? Testing yourself with actual examples out there in the media, Idin.
Yeah. I think it's the kind of like this framework. Well, if you read Little Law articles, they're kind of framed like this anyway. That's how I try and write the summaries, or anyone who writes for Little Law, that we kind of go through this process of trying to weed that out. So that would kind of be the first step. But going through this framework and going through this process over and over again makes it easier. Like the first time trying to figure out what a law firm does in a corporate transaction could be challenging, and you might have to read around a lot or ask people. But essentially, once you figure it out once, it will be very similar for all other corporate transactions. So it does get easier over time. But yeah, I would go through different news stories, things that interest you, and then kind of go through this process of look out, what are the wider factors? Look in, what are the decision makers thinking internal within this organization? And then law firm involvement. Why would a law firm care about this?
Thank you. Sarah, Ruth, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I mean, slightly different to Idin. I do a lot of like commercial agreements with my work, and I think a lot of it is understanding, well, to Idin's point, understanding the parties involved, but also just everyday transactions. I think we can sometimes underestimate how much we experience this on a smaller scale every day. In terms of, you know, understanding what benefit you're getting, what other side is getting from a situation. So if you're buying something, we have a lot of businesses that want to license with us, right? And part of understanding how to ensure we get a good agreement is knowing what the parties benefit from, right? So if the licensee is looking for something that's going to assist them in the wider business, you know, understanding what their needs are. And you can compare that to when you buy, you know, goods outside, you know, what is the benefit that you're gaining from that? What is the other side getting in return? And being able to estimate, okay, how do I ensure that both parties receive, you know, a happy bargain, a good bargain? So, I mean, it's pretty much, you know, when you're looking at commercial agreements, that on a much broader and more complex scale, but you'd be surprised how many examples you will go through on a day-to-day basis that mirror that exchange, right? And when professionals get involved or support, you know, what are they trying to help those two parties achieve? So I think sometimes when we say, because I had the same problem when I was in law school, people were like, you know, what's commercial awareness? And it sounds so vague and abstract, but actually in a nutshell, it's pretty much speaking about an engagement where two parties are trying to get a win out of that scenario. And, you know, if you're working in commercial law, your job is to help find a happy medium that benefits the, you know, who you're representing, but also benefits the client. So I think, you know, it sometimes is thinking about those scenarios and breaking them down in a way that can be explained. I think to your point, if you are taking interest in wider businesses, it can be an industry that you really enjoy. I think some people try to read about industries that don't interest them at all. And I don't think that's a good place to start trying to learn about it. I think find an industry or an area that interests you and try to look for the commercial, you know, instances that are happening in those things. And then you can kind of almost mirror that in other areas. I think that's really what helped me, is to be able to kind of look at day-to-day scenarios that I could, you know, be able to then expand on.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all really good advice. The other thing I would just add in terms of another facet of commercial awareness is just sort of adding on to Idin's point about stepping into the shoes of the organisations you're looking at, is just really trying to get to grips with what the business does, just reading round and understanding sort of the business. Perhaps and again pointing to the thing that Ruth mentioned is sort of as well as understanding the benefits that can be brought to the agreement by both parties, but think about, you know, what's their risk appetite. It's all about, you know, what drives them as a business. Are they really risk averse, in which case they're going to take a much more cautious approach, or are they quite adventurous and they like to take risks? So it's all of those kind of things that you think about as a person, to be honest, sort of when you're entering into deals, just on a commercial in a commercial context. So thinking about when you're entering into a big transaction like buying a car, buying a house, or even buying sort of expensive goods, think about all those considerations that motivate you, and that's kind of then mirrored in the commercial world in relation to some of these bigger deals.
Thank you. We'll move on to perhaps interviews and specific roles in a little bit, but a couple of questions just in the chat that I wanted to cover off because they've been there a little while. So Sarah, there was something about how to record your qualifying work experience. That there's a template, is that right?
There is, yes. There's an SRA template that you can use. I don't know if you use this, Ruth, when you recorded yours. But if you go on to, and in fact, you can get it from, I'm not sure we've got it in our chat bar, but we've got a link to it. We've got a QWE area on our website that gives you all the background that we've just discussed, and various links to different documents, including the SRA template for recording your QWE, and that provides you with a really good framework. It might be that some of the organisations already have, if they're already au fait with QWE and have got themselves organised, they might already have a document that you use. But if not, the SRA template's a good place to start. And as I say, Ruth, I'm not sure, did you use that for your QWE?
Yes, I did. So because I think when you go on the portal and you start your process, it takes you through different stages. So it's really quite easy to find your way, because it will take you to the next step and you can go back. So the form is on there, and then you can kind of just fill it in and share it with the lawyer that's looking at over your work. So I had that, and I kind of was updating it and things like that. So yeah, as you've said, you can always add and take away. As you said, if you get better experience after a certain period of time, you can always replace it with that. So,
and I think we did have some questions, thank you, in the registration from non-law graduates, but there's been a question here from a non-law grad, and again, that kind of creativity, I suppose, that's going to be required to try and help someone who hasn't got that law degree get that first legal work experience, or be successful in that vacation scheme application. So does anyone have any advice for non-law graduates specifically?
I would say it's still similar. I know it sounds really crazy, but it's still very similar, because there were a lot of people who I knew who transferred, and they'd had jobs in stores. They had roles where they just led groups, where they'd had to use people, especially when it comes to being a solicitor, and you have to try and get clientele. If you're in a sales role, I've done lots of random little jobs. I did a telesales role over one summer when I was at law school, and I could use that for talking about pitching and being able to kind of talk to clients and things like that. So you'd be surprised that it tends, I would say, it tends to not matter if you're able to really use your experiences wisely and pull out certain things. I think for me, the difference when I did law school, when I was going through a law degree, was that I got to do mooting and I got to do pro bono stuff. But aside from that, I feel that there are other roles that I did that were still just as valuable in showing what I could do in that space. So not to say don't worry, but I would say don't worry. I think it's important to kind of know what skills they're looking out for, ultimately.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that, sort of, if, for example, if your degree is like in a science or even in humanities, all those, again, those academic skills that you have to use, so logical thinking, problem solving, analysis, that's, again, all those qualities that you need as a lawyer. So again, don't be afraid to reference those as part of any applications you make, because those are going to be valuable transferable skills. And sometimes actually employers quite like looking at people who haven't just gone straight through doing a law degree, getting on the bandwagon sort of thing. They that they find people from different backgrounds can be much can have a very interesting experience that they can bring to the table. So don't be afraid. If you haven't got a law degree is the main thing.
Thank you. Whilst we start talking a little bit about interviews, I'm conscious that we have, for the people that are here, you're really welcome to continue adding questions to the chat bar, because we'll probably tailor the rest of the panel to any questions that you have, if that's okay. So feel free to keep adding questions into the chat whilst we explore interviews. So we've had a couple of questions submitted, which were about how to give a good impression and how to crack an interview. So Idin, how to impress at interview stage?
I think a lot of the time it's well, I guess it depends on what type of question you're being asked. Sometimes you get competency interviews where people ask you about, give me an example where you demonstrated insert competency here, leadership, or you went above and beyond, or something like that. I think in those sorts of questions, that the thing that made the difference between when I was not successful and successful was structure in my answer. And by that I mean there are certain frameworks you can use. One's called STAR, which is quite common, and that stands for situation, task, action, result. And I think using that framework makes it much more easy for the listener to follow, and for you to tick off all the boxes. I don't know if there are necessarily boxes, but like metaphorical boxes that they have when they're speaking to you. So, for example, if they say, "Give me an example of when you demonstrated leadership," you could talk about, you'd set out the situation. So in my university, I was president of Law Society. Then the T is for task. I was tasked with running our events for the year. Action, then you can make these more specific. Say, I don't know, created a calendar which set everything out ahead of time, and then as a result, everything went really smoothly. Obviously, you'd do better than I just did, and you can make it more tailored to what you've done, and the more specific, the better, because I think it makes your answer more interesting and it makes it more unique. So I would say for questions like that, where you clearly see that there's direction behind the question and there's something that they're looking for you to tick off, I think structure in the answer is the most important thing. And for questions that are a bit more general, I think the most important characteristic, again, the difference between when I did well and when I did not so well, was authenticity in my answer, and just being comfortable with being myself for the first couple of, and this is way easier said than done, because I didn't know anyone who's a lawyer, like I'm not from a background of lawyers. So when I went into my first round of applications, I always tried to kind of play a role of what I thought like perfect lawyer answers should be, or how a perfect lawyer should act. And I just came across really odd, I think, because I would like sit differently and talk differently and act differently and answer. And I didn't know if they ask about my interests, are they interested in my actual interests, or am I like meant to be pretending that I have more lawyerly interests? So I think those sorts of questions, be confident in just being yourself. And usually those sorts of questions I find is generally people are trying to assess what type of personality you have, what your character is, whether you'd be a good colleague, good co-worker. There's a line that people say, like, if there's a late night deadline, would you be the sort of person that they would want on the team? So just someone who's I guess has the right character for that firm, and not always trying to give the perfect lawyerly answer. I think that is important, and that's something that took me probably 2 years to get over. And I think, yeah, it will differ based on if you know lawyers or not. I think Ruth mentioned this earlier. If you're not familiar or around people who are lawyers, you might have an idea of what they should be saying or how they should be acting, and try and live up to that, which was like a recipe for failure for me. So yeah, learn from my mistakes and save yourself the pain.
Oh no, but thanks for sharing that, Idin. That's really helpful. Sarah, Ruth, would you like to add to that?
I was just going to say, I think being yourself, I know it's really hard, but being yourself in the interview is a real must, because remember, this is a job that hopefully you'll be getting, and you'll want to make sure that not only do you fit into the role, but also you're also looking at them. Is this the kind of firm I really want to work for? And so there's no point being false and projecting an image that isn't you, because it might be that it's actually the wrong sort of firm. Okay, nobody likes rejection, but it might not be the right sort of firm for you either. So I think being yourself is as well as obviously all the other technical issues that you need to address for an interview, but being yourself is sort of a number one necessity for interviews as well.
Yeah, I would just echo what Sarah said. So I I think it's a sort of textbook error. So it's what Idin did. I kind of had a mental picture of the kind of firm I wanted to work for, and you glamorize it, and you basically become that, frame. And I realized, after a couple of years of working there, it just wasn't for me. And I think it's okay, to understand, okay, what kind of character do I have? What environments do I enjoy? And really work towards that. And I think, I would say I'm probably more of an in-house commercial. I enjoy that kind of, people interaction in that sense. I work best in that environment. I came through private practice route, for example. And I think understanding your personality and the kind of person you are is really key, because I think when you don't know that, you'll find that you're trying to probably attract a firm that may not be in alignment with the kind of person you are, the kind of work you want to do. So I think it's really good, as Sarah said, I think I wish I trusted my instincts earlier, if that makes sense, to trust the kind of person I was, what would make sense for me, rather than questioning that and trying to fit a mold that really wasn't it. So I think, you'll be surprised how much you gain from being yourself. But I always say a rule of thumb is always to be a professional. I think that's what colleagues work with people. If you are ultimately a good professional, I think it's easier to translate that into better working relationships and, being able to excel. I think if you're thinking purely about academically, or how can I be the best lawyer, and not just thinking about as a person, how do I come across, and am I good, in just being a good professional and a good teammate, I think you'll probably find it harder to find, I say finding your tribe work-wise. So I think it is a collection of obviously having the head knowledge. But I think, when we think about work environments, irrespective of what we're doing, it's a personality, and professionalism is a big one. So yeah, I would just add that I think working in the commercial space now, a lot of the work that's done is relationship based, and being able to deliver your advice in a way that the team and stakeholders can really appreciate and be able to understand. So don't underestimate those kind of softer skills as well.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a couple more questions, and then I think we'll finish up. So if anyone else has any more questions for the panel, please pop them in the chat. So we had a couple of questions around working in smaller firms or boutique firms, or working in-house. So how does the world work outside all these training contracts and schemes that we see from all these big companies? And if we're looking much more at smaller firms or maybe in-house, what are the opportunities available in terms of getting into those different areas of practice? Sarah?
Well, I'll speak to in-house because that's an environment that I know. So I would say sometimes, sort of, you might not even start off, you're looking at the in-house situation you want to go into, but you might not even start off in the legal department. You might just get your foot through the door and get into the organisation. And then once you're inside that, you might be able to do a sideway step into the legal department once you sort of know the organisation. That's one route into in-house. Some of the bigger organisations have in-house departments that are actually the size of small firms, in which case you might have training contract opportunities or paralegal opportunities or locum opportunities, and that's another way into the in-house environment as well. So those are a couple of options to think about. A lot of people think that you need to have got your sort of qualification and a couple of years post qualification experience to move in-house, because people like you to have had some time in private practice, but that's not necessarily the case. Some of the bigger organisations do want to actually train from within and sort of bring on their own lawyers. So it's a question of just keeping your mind open and looking for all the different opportunities. But as I say, one of the ways you could do it is go in sort of by the back door, get into the organisation, and then look to move sideways into the legal department if you can.
Mm-hmm. And Idin, the kind of smaller firms, I had a couple of questions about boutique law firms, or maybe a smaller family law firms. The approach could be a little different, or
I never actually worked in any of the smaller law firms, so I can only speak anecdotally from what I've heard from people. I think what 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 you get at bigger firms with bigger intakes is more, I guess, structure in the training contract, um, compared to smaller firms where it might be a bit less structured, and you might get, in fact, you might get more responsibility and a bit more freedom. Um, and I think that also is an analogy you can draw between firms with big intakes and firms with smaller intakes. Like some of the US firms have trainee intakes of like 1 or 2, whereas my firm CMS is like, I don't know, maybe 90 plus 100 training contracts in a year. Um, and it reflects in the way that you work as a trainee. And I think that's one thing that when people are asking me about the challenge of narrowing down which firm they should apply to, because they know they should apply it in a more focused way, but they don't know how to narrow down the firms that seemingly are the same from the outside. I think this is one way that you can. Trainee intake or number of trainees, or juniors there will probably color your experience at that firm. And some people prefer the structure of bigger. This is a big generalization, but like some people will prefer the bigger intakes, which tend to be more structured, and some people will prefer the ones that are smaller. And I can imagine boutique firms' experience will be more similar to that.
Yeah, thank you. Ruth?
Yeah, I guess I can speak somewhat to both, in that, yeah, definitely, to Idin's point, private practice is definitely more structured, probably going to get a lot less responsibility, but more, I would say, someone guiding you and supporting you with that kind of thing, versus in-house where you may be one of two of the only legal professionals in the building, and so there is a lot of responsibility there. There is a fast growth as well. So if you're somebody who wants a challenge like that, you might want to apply for roles like that, because you then have a lot more exposure. I think, in terms of when you are working for the larger groups, I think, or larger firms, I think, again, if you're somebody who enjoys structure and you're somebody who likes to have that kind of, I want to experience different things and I want to have that guidance, that would probably be your best bet. If you're someone who's a bit more adventurous in that sense, not that that's a given, you might want something that is a bit more of a challenge, a bit more responsibility. To Sarah's point, there are a lot of companies that take you on just to do contract management, for example, which is, you don't need a legal degree for that. You may be doing just admin of legal contracts and build it from there. So there are lots of ways in which don't require any kind of legal experience, that are simply just you doing administrative tasks. I also want to highlight how much document review saved my career. Document review, as mundane as it is probably one of the easiest ways to get a foot in the door, because they just want you to look out for certain things, and a lot of firms are willing to train you on the job. So that there are ways of getting your foot in the door without going through a grueling application process that are very entry level. So I would look out for those and opportunities where you can segue. Another thing I would say, if I may, is as much as possible try to research, because a lot of the ways I was able to learn what a firm was doing was, okay, they've got this administrative or commercial department, and they've also got a really big law department. So mentally, it's like you plan and say, okay, well, how can I segue by getting in here? If they've got an opening for an administrative assistant, if I can get myself into the firm, I can have those conversations. And sometimes you have to think like that and say, it's not going to be a direct hit to the legal role, but it might just be that I know that they have openings in other areas, but I know that I eventually want to find my way into this department. I think that sometimes once you're internal, especially say without our firm, although that's a different thing, but they like to hire internally, and they're usually more open to somebody who's worked at the company to then trying something else. So just a thought, because, and this is my last thing I would say, is similar to Idin and my experience, it may take you a long time, a really long time, before you're getting through an application, through a vacation scheme or any kind of opportunity, in that time you could potentially be working for a company that you didn't go in there in a legal way, in terms of the legal route, right? And then you've done 2 years there already and found yourself then working for their legal. So there are ways. That was definitely my journey, is I had to be creative and, do other jobs and basically build my network to kind of get those opportunities. So that could be your journey as well, where it's not that straightforward kind of process. It's, moving around basically.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. And that's, I guess, the flexibility that people now have. Sarah, there are a couple of questions in the chat specifically about QWE and SQE and the college. Perhaps you could help with those. So could someone finish their degree, work for 2 years to gain their QWE and then apply for the SQE?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was partly what the SRA envisaged when they set up the new route to qualification. They were thinking that perhaps people would finish their law degree, do a bit of work experience, then use that to get onto the first part of the prep course, which is SQE1, then do a little bit more work experience, and then move on to the second part of the SQE exam. So absolutely, yes, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just once you embark on your SQE exam part of the journey, you must remember that you have to complete this first part and the second part within that 6-year period.
Yeah, thank you. And does the College of Legal Practice offer the bar course at all? If so, are there any more sessions on it?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we don't at the moment. We're very much focused on the solicitor pathway. But what I would say is that we have it depends. I don't know whether this person's got a law degree or not, but what we do is, if you haven't got a law degree but you're thinking of going down the bar route, we do offer a graduate diploma in law, which can be used both for the solicitor and the bar pathway to qualification. But we don't offer any specific bar vocational course qualification courses at the moment.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. I'd just like to finally ask you all really, what's the best experience you could recommend to an aspiring solicitor? What a fantastic question. And anything you'd like to reinforce or say in terms of your advice or recommendations. So what's the best experience you'd recommend to aspiring solicitor? Idin?
The best experience I'd recommend.
I'm assuming they mean legal experience.
I don't know. That's a tough one. The best experience I'd recommend for an aspiring lawyer. Well, I would go back to the thing. In terms of work experience or legal experience that I had, was the best one, I think, was the 2 weeks I did in Brent Law Centre. That you're helping people who are very vulnerable, and even like something as like. I think one thing that I really want to reinforce, and I think it came up in the questions, was about this distinction between law and non-law, because I know a lot of non-law students kind of self-select themselves or like avoid legal roles or consider themselves at a lower standing, and to them I would say don't do that, because I think what you're doing there is you're overestimating how much relevant legal skills you learn in a law degree. And you learn some legal skills, of course, but you're not learning that. Like, I didn't learn anything that I did in my training contract from my law degree. A lot of it was learning from the role itself as a trainee lawyer, and an associate. The same. I didn't learn very little of what I did in my job. I learned in my degree and I did a law degree. So I think with that in mind, kind of try to understand and internalize that, and know that in fact that the skills that you need to be a competent lawyer isn't technical skills that you're taught at uni. I think Sarah mentioned that earlier about the skills you have in your degree, even like analytical skills or clear writing and things like that are huge and really valuable, and it's easy to take that for granted. And to answer your actual question, I think the best experience was that 2 weeks I did in Brent Law Centre, or 2.5 weeks I did in Brent Law Centre, because you really see that. I was a law graduate at the time. I could have been any graduate from any degree. I would have still had a massive, providing massive value there, because you're in the role, you're dealing with people who are vulnerable, who are English as a second language, and something as simple as being able to communicate with them and help them fill out a form, like an immigration form or something. You realize that how much value you can add, and this is kind of like a quasi-legal position, and the skill I'm adding there is, you know, communication with them and, you know, knowing English, which is helpful. So I think that, like, by analogy, you can draw an analogy or a straight line from that to a lot of legal roles, that the skills you need, the hard technical skills, you're not expected to have beforehand. For me as a corporate lawyer, didn't know anything, or I knew very little about corporate law before. At least I guess I learned a few things in my LPC, but from my law degree, I learned almost nothing that was relevant to my corporate law career. And it was, in fact, just, you know, being willing to ask questions and being diligent and organized. And these are the sort of things that were the prerequisites to doing well in that job. And anything you needed to know technically about, you know, what percentage is a special resolution or an ordinary resolution, these things, that you'll learn that in the role. So yeah, that was kind of
Thank
a
you.
long-winded answer, but
But
basically, for non-law students, don't self-select or consider yourself in a worse position.
I know, it's an important message. Thank you. Sarah?
I was gonna, mine sort of leads on from Idin's actually, but I would just say, just try and see what it's really like to be in a law firm, because, you know, you'll get this idea perhaps from TV. It's sort of, you're in court all the time, it suits, you're on these business deals and everything, and real life obviously isn't like, it's great, you know, it's enjoyable, but it's not like that. So just go and try and just get, even if it's just literally shadowing somebody, go and see what it's really like on a day-to-day basis, and see whether, as Ruth has said, that's going to suit your personality, your characteristics, things you like doing. Because if you don't like, for example, you know, you think, oh great, I want to be a commercial lawyer, but if you don't like drafting documents and looking at paperwork all day, it's not going to be for you. So absolutely, just try and see what it's like to be in a sort of in a law firm would be my biggest thing.
Thank you. And Ruth?
Yeah, I would echo what Sarah said, and I would say try and get a few experiences under your belt before you start applying rigorously. Because I think by the time, if you get a couple of, you know, maybe two kind of little bits of experience, you've kind of got already a flavor of what do you prefer and what do you enjoy. And I think that's kind of what I would say. I really enjoyed my pro bono work. I did some supporting people, you know, lower level prisoners who were getting out and who wanted help understanding how to get housing. You know, and you forget suicide and how simple but how complicated that is when you don't have exposure. So you may really enjoy that, you know, versus, you know, again, being someone who's very detail oriented and wanting. So I think these experiences will color what you decide to ultimately do. And also I would say it sounds annoying when you hear it, but be patient, because you'd be surprised how much time will enable you to better know what you enjoy and also give you experiences that will help your applications. It can be very easy to want to just apply out the gate and want to kind of really just, you know, be the first one out the door, but it takes a lot of time to figure out what works best. And you may find that you stumble across opportunities just by being in a role that then helps your journey. So I'm a very strong advocate for the road to qualifying as lawyers not linear, you know, and I think we often, the story is sold that, you know, I'll do a degree in law, I'll go to law school and I'll get my training contract, and you think that that's how it works. And for some it does, but those usually are exceptions. You know, majority of people tend to have to go through a few roles, a number of applications. And so I would say that is more the norm, if, you know, to be fair. And I think making that more of a reality for people to understand that it's normal to have to wait, you know, for these things to come up, makes it more you are doing okay. You probably are on the right track, even by being on this call as well. So I would say that equally to the point about doing a non-law degree, you'd be surprised how often people who have done different degrees have actually got an upper hand, because they understand how the world works, or they understand politics, or they understand certain life skills that aren't necessarily included in your law degree. So I would add to what Idin said, is don't underestimate that what you've learned from your degree that isn't law is not just as valuable as if you had done something else. I think that's really key for people who are looking to qualify as well.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for giving your time. Thank you to those of you who attended or watching. We really appreciate you joining us. So there is more information on qualifying work experience, and also how to access the law and getting into the profession, on the college's website. So take a look, but I'll pop some links over to you. And also, I guess a shout out to Little Law from Idin as well, if you're looking to develop your commercial awareness. It sounds like even I might be able to understand some of your bite-sized articles. So thank you, Idin, for making that accessible and helpful for everyone. But yeah, I hope everyone found that helpful. And hopefully we'll see you at another event supporting your career soon. So thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.